Hi, my name is Debbie, and I am obsessed with all things to do with ultrasound. I'm an empty nester who has spent the last 28 years scanning in all different kinds of situations: clinics, hospitals, point of service, emergency departments, private offices, echo, vascular, general, high-risk OB, and want to dive down deep into all things to do with technology, techniques, and transformation. It's time we take ultrasound to the next level. Think of this like your little power boost on your commute to all things ultrasound, along your way to the thing that we call work. So pull up a seat, make sure you're comfy, and be ready to be challenged and encouraged as we learn it's all about the frequency. Our next guest is Jim Baun. He has a master's in education. He's RDMS, RVT, FSDMS, and he is a pioneer in clinical research and academic sonographer who has been practicing since the early days of the profession. With over 40 years of experience in the field, his areas of expertise have come to include vascular and OBGYN sonography, hemodynamics, ultrasound physics and instrumentation, and emerging technologies. Working with ultrasound scientists and engineers, the Silicon Valley for decades, Jim acquired a unique perspective and knowledge base of the underlying technology advances in the industry. He is widely published in the medical literature and has authored several academic textbooks and over 30 peer-reviewed journal articles. He has served on the faculty and advisory councils for several universities and college-based sonography programs and has developed didactic curricula for private educational organizations throughout the United States and abroad. In recognition of his contributions to the profession, Jim was elevated to fellow status in the Society of Diagnostic Medical Sonography in 1997. He was the recipient of the Joan Baker Pioneer Award in 2016 and delivered the prestigious McLaughlin Memorial Lecture at the SDMS Annual Conference in 2019. Just this year, Jim was inducted into Marquis Who's Who in America as an honored listee. After living and working for 35 years in the San Francisco Bay Area in Silicon Valley, Jim retired to his hometown of Toledo, Ohio in 2019, but remains active as a clinical education and research consultant for ultrasound device manufacturers and sonography educational programs. His recent published textbooks, Sonography, Acoustic to Images, and Hemodynamics for Sonographers, are available through his website, www.sonoscholar, that's SONOSCHOLAR.com. Please help me welcome Jim Baun. Please help me welcome Jim Baun. Jim, thanks again for joining us for a new topic of advances in ultrasound imaging architecture. Jim has recently published a textbook on ultrasound physics and another textbook on hemodynamics. I encourage you to get them. I think technology has definitely changed over the course of my 28 years of being in ultrasound. And I don't think our textbook have kept up with that. And although we learn the basics of physics, of sound physics in our schools, I don't think we're learning this new technology that's keeping us going, which would be important for us to learn and know. So Jim is here to talk to us about that and give us a little bit of his background in this field.
Thanks, Debbie. Good to be here.
Good. So tell us a little bit about your background with the technical or engineering part of this and the people that you've kind of worked with in order to help you write this book and put it out to the world.
Sure. Well, I'm a sonographer by trade. I'm a trained clinical vascular OBGYN radiology sonographer, by trade, but alongside that, over my 40 years, I also was an educator and have been in the faculty, several different universities and community colleges and private institutes in the San Francisco Bay Area. So as an educator, one of my areas of expertise was sonography, physics, and instrumentation. Usually by default, because most of the other instructors just didn't want to teach that. So
Right.
I kind of fell into that back in the late 80s, actually. And over the course of my career, again, in the San Francisco Bay Area, Silicon Valley, I consulted with and worked with a number of ultrasound companies that were all grew up in the Valley back in the 80s and 90s. All the big ones were there. And I would be the sort of the liaison as the clinical person that would go in and teach the engineers and the physicists about the clinical aspects of ultrasound. And then they would teach me about the instrumentation, which I could then take back to my classes and to my out into the field. So I was kind of in a unique position of the kind of the translator between clinical, practical sonography and engineering acoustic physics. So those have come together over the decades and resulted in, again, my teaching, writing several books before this current one. But then finally, I mean, what prompted me to do this final book was working for a company in the Silicon Valley that invented a new way to do ultrasound. Now, physics doesn't change. Physics, laws of the universe, acoustic energy, human soft tissue, laws of the universe.
Right.
How that information is captured and used has changed, and that's the technology or the instrumentation. So I worked for a company that invented the original inventors of this new architecture. Now, everybody's doing it today, but back in the day, back in 1999 and 2000, it was brand new. So I had the fortunate opportunity of being on the inside of this new virtual beamforming technology stuff that has subsequently become the standard of all high-end ultrasound platforms. And that's what my book addresses, is tries to translate the new way of creating ultrasound images into English so that sonographers, so we can understand it.
Awesome. What need that we've had. And so thank you for filling that. And I've often wondered, I'm like, okay, these are not the transducers we learned about when I was in school, right? And I've often wondered, I couldn't even begin to tell you what's inside these,
Right.
Before I thought I had an idea, and now I have no idea, right? So it's been definitely a need in our profession for a long time. So thank you so much for
Sure.
putting in that work. That's a lot of work and hours and revisions, I'm sure. So I appreciate that. So yeah, improving acquisition and the way that that's done is super important. And I think you make a valid point also that for a couple of reasons of why we don't teach the new, right? Because our test us on the old.
Right.
And so we have to pass the old, and so we don't teach the new. And so I think
Well,
that's again.
that's exactly my mantra. And as I've been out in the field for a number of years working for this company, presenting the new technology at annual meetings, at conferences around the United States and actually around the world in some cases. That's the issue here in the United States, is that the ARDMS and the CCI, the testing organizations cannot and will not test material that the teachers don't teach. The teachers won't teach something that the tests don't ask. So
Right.
it's kind of circular reasoning, is that we're not testing it, we're not going to teach it. Well, if you don't teach it, we can't test it. So kind of my swan song in the field is to try to bring awareness to sonography educators and to the world that, okay, let's kick it off here.
Yeah.
Let's start teaching it. Let's start talking about it. And then probably when I really am retired, maybe it will be tested on the registry.
Wouldn't that be nice, right? Change
My
takes
goal.
for such a long time, right? Change takes a
Right.
while. So can you just review for us the pillars of like conventional imaging architect
Sure.
first?
Sure. Okay, so this is going to get into subject matter that most sonographers really just recoil at, but just bear with me for a minute. And this is a really simplified diagram or schematic of how an ultrasound image is created. We're going to call that the image creation chain from the beamforming, conventional beamforming. If you all remember, there's steering and there's focusing. It's all done with timing circuits and timing events and very much the old way of doing it, but it worked. Now, again, I want to say that the old way of doing it wasn't bad. We did great work for many years,
Right.
but conventional beamforming was the first part of that, both focusing the beam on transmit with our little focal zone indicator on the machine,
Right.
also focusing on receive, which was also done using timing delays. Well, all that data that came back from the patient's body, we're going to call that the acoustic data set. For years we called it pulse echo imaging. That's not wrong, but it's not accurate. It's transmit of ultrasound energy, acoustic energy, and receive of acoustic data. So the acoustic data set, and this will be important on the next on advanced ultrasound imaging, the received acoustic data consists of literally trillions of individual data bits. Now that data is acquired by the transducer. And in the conventional system, the dynamic range, and like you said, Debbie, the transducer we're using now aren't the same. Well, they couldn't handle that trillions of bits.
Right.
So it would send that data to the receiver. And again, if we remember our schooling, the functions of a receiver are amplification, compensation, compression, rejection, demodulation, whatever. The whole net effect of all those receiver functions is loss of about 90% of that trillions of bit of data. 90% of what we can use, gone. It's dumped. They actually call this method on the engineering world, they call this the sum and dump method.
Oh,
Because
wow.
90% is dumped. So if we got 10% of the data left. Now we're going to send it to the scan converter. First of all, receivers are no more. Scan converters are no more. But in the days of scan conversion, that data coming from the receiver was additionally compressed, so we're losing another about 5%. So what we're doing is creating an image, grayscale, color Doppler, pulse Doppler, with about 5 to 7 to 8% of that original acoustic data set.
Okay.
So we're losing a whole lot of data that can be used. The other difference with the conventional method was, remember our line by line image create. Every frame, one transducer element gave us one line of sight, and a line of sight, a line of sight. We had 128 or 512 or 1021, whatever. In doing so, in constructing that image with a limited number of lines, you're limiting the ability, line density, you're limiting the ability to get good lateral resolution. So again, we're losing information. Again, the conventional image creation chain used for ever and ever. We made great diagnostic calls, we made great pictures, but things got better. So about 1999, a company in the Silicon Valley created something called virtual beamforming. And again, that's the company I was talking about. Now, virtual beamforming, the beam is not focused mechanically. It is not, well, steered, but it's not focused. So instead, typically what happens with virtual beamforming is all of those transducer elements, remember there's like 128 or 512 or whatever individual crystals in that transducer, they fire them all at the same time, creating something called a plane wave. That acoustic energy interacts the same way, the laws of physics, and sends back about 1 trillion bits of data in a big ball, the received acoustic data set. And now, with the technology we have, we can capture that 1 trillion bits. The dynamic range is there, the capabilities are there to capture 1 trillion bits of data.
Okay.
Another advance is the ability to transfer 1 trillion bits of data from one component to another. That was always a bottleneck in technology. You could have a big bunch of data, but if you
Okay.
couldn't get it from this component to the next component, you were stuck. Well, that's changed with technology.
Okay.
Now we have that, what
So
we're calling
instead of 5% we're able to use almost 100% of that
about
information.
90%, about 90% of the data.
90%.
Exactly.
Okay.
So you got that trillion bits. Now we're going to call that big data. And this is not unique to ultrasound. But now we have 90% of the big data, no data loss that we've captured, we've transferred, and we're not going to send it. We don't have a receiver. We're not truncating it. We're not dumping it.
Okay.
And now we're sending it right into computer memory,
Okay.
right into digital signal processing.
Okay.
And if you think about all the capabilities, I don't know if you have kids or friends, or if you all do live video gaming, the resolution, the incredible, beautiful pictures,
Right.
digital signal processing.
Okay.
So now we're applying all kinds of advanced algorithms, software programs, firmware programs, all that computer stuff. We're applying that to this big data set, and we're sending it off to a frame creation or an image creation where it's not line by line. Now we're creating it pixel by pixel. So now we can focus, we can do whatever we want with every one of those individual pixels. We can make one pixel a grayscale pixel. We can make a pixel a color Doppler pixel. We can make it an elastography pixel.
Okay.
So now we have created an image, not line by line, but pixel by pixel.
Wow.
So the net effect of all this new virtual image creation chain is we're using a lot more data, bigger, better, faster, creating improved conventional modalities, grayscale, color, spectral Doppler, et cetera. But it also opens the opportunity now for us to create new modalities. One more comment before I shut up on this. But when we look at these frames that we create, these are on the back end. And I think we all remember frame rate.
Right.
That could be an issue if you go too deep in the patient frame rate. You put a whole lot of focal zones, your frame rate goes down, and that's called temporal resolution.
Right.
Those are real constraints. Well, those are gone because we're not focusing the beam. We're not doing line by line transmit. We're not doing line by line receive. So, and with this new technology on the back end, we can create up to 1,200 frames per second. Now, remember your frame rate. If you got a frame rate of 60, it was cool, huh?
Right. That's
that
what
was
it's
really
kind of
cool.
blowing my mind a little bit. Right.
Well, it is. It is totally mind blowing. But not.
Right.
Another quick comment is that these are back end frames. So
Okay.
we're not going to show you 1,200 frames a second on the screen. That's a waste of energy. The eye can't. So we'll present to the viewer 120 frames per second, maybe, just so it doesn't look windshield wipery.
Right.
And however, with 1,200 frames on the back end, the terms of new applications, new things they can do with that is astounding. So I'll leave it at that, but that's the virtual advanced method of creating ultrasound images.
Thank you. Wow, that was so helpful. I feel a little bit more educated in regard to the newer technology and understanding that. So that's very helpful. Thank you so much. That is amazing.
You're welcome.
So this is what your
textbook
kind of reviews, right? And goes over. And so I think the textbook, as you mentioned, does help you take the SPI, but it also helps you understand the newer technology and the increasing applications that this has.
And in fact, exactly, yes, again, the textbook is geared toward the traditional sonography physics and instrumentation content that the registries or the CCI tests. So that's there. But in addition to that, there is a chapter on this new technology, pretty much little bit more in depth of what I just presented. But then I also threw in, included a chapter just on contrast enhanced ultrasound,
Okay.
and then one on elastography, since those are established modalities, not completely related to the new way of doing things. We've been doing contrast before this new advance, and same with elastography, but now using this new huge amount of data, the quality, the resolution, the temporal resolution of both of those modalities is significantly improved. So, but it's, again, those are modalities in common use in clinical practice. So I included a chapter on each of those as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. So I remember being in a lab in Minnesota when some new equipment came out, and they had purchased the equipment, so they were installing the equipment. And I just remember sitting there thinking, wow, my brain is on overload. That's a lot of information coming at me, right? Like, that's more gray shades than I've ever been able to see, right?
Right.
And so I think someone who's been in the field for a while can certainly appreciate it. Like, I just had to like sit and take it in, like it was like I was seeing this amazing, awe-inspiring, like wonder of
Well,
the world or something, it was
and a comment on the grayscale image, just talking about grayscale imaging that we've all done, we do it every day.
right,
And I agree with you. The first time I saw one of these grayscale images created using this technology, I was blown away because
right,
the sharpness, the clarity, the resolution,
right,
spatial resolution from the top skin line all the way down to the deepest depth was amazing. And the reason that is, back to this, we're not using mechanical focusing.
right,
You get a trillion bits of data, and using software, they can focus every pixel in every frame at every level using software. So you don't have to narrow the beam to get a
right,
good picture of that gallstone.
right,
Software is doing that for you. So the entire image from skin line to deepest depths is in full focus. Now there's physics. You're going to have divergence and stuff in the far
right,
field. But
right.
that accounts for these mind-blowing images that we're
Yes.
seeing.
So I have to say, as a user of this technology, right? I'm presently in a lab that has some new technology, but some really old technology. And so sometimes I work in one room for half of the day, and then I go to old technology the other half of the day. And it
Okay.
just takes a while. Like
No, I know.
it just takes some time to adjust to that, what you're seeing or not seeing.
You never want to go back.
Yeah, it's quite an adjustment. And I think, I try to explain to the physicians, you're gonna have to give me a couple patients for me to get used to this old technology again, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm not seeing anything, and I'm pushing harder to try to get it more clear or making more adjustments to get it, because now my expectation is much higher than what it was before, right?
I agree. And another observation, again, having gone out into the field to show clinical people the new technology, the new images, and again, traveling pretty extensively, going into sonography labs where they're using the old technology, but the
Right, right.
conventional technology, is there's resistance. And this is interesting, just because, we are creatures of habit.
Yes,
Go
yes.
into a lab with my applications people and my, say, the whole, we're going to
Right.
show you
The whole
something new.
group, right?
And the original systems did not have a focal zone adjustment on the console. There was no focal zone toggle switch or radio dial. And they would, how do I focus? Well, every pixel is software focus. And it certainly was a deal breaker in a lot of cases because sonographers wouldn't believe it. Well, I need to do my focal zone.
Right.
The machine's doing it for you. So what that company did is they actually put a dial on their next generation equipment. They just put a dial, so let's just call it focal zone. And it would bring a carrot up and down, and it would do a little bit of image adjustment. They were doing this frame by frame, pixel by pixel focusing. But the new, change is hard.
change is hard. I think, sometimes if I understand it, the technology better, then maybe I'm a little bit more willing to accept it, right? So, um, I think education's might be a piece that's missing from that, right? Like no one's explained that to me like you just did,
Mhm.
right? And it's been 3 years since I've seen the technology.
Right, right.
So, it is, it's hard, but we don't take the time to be educated. There's no one to really give us like a handout to say, this is how this is created and this is how it's working and different things. So,
Well, and in reality, the only material that's out there, I mean, except my book, but
right,
the only material that's out there is marketing material that the manufacturers come up with.
right, right,
And and again, that's a marketing perspective, and that's okay. And I mean, I'm not going to name any names, but the top
right,
five, top
right,
five companies all have some kind of technology handout or brochure, but it doesn't talk generically like I just did about the imaging
right,
chain. Our technology does this and uses this fancy stuff, and I think
right,
that's
right,
important.
right,
But again, my kind of my mission over the last, gosh, 7 or 8 years now is to summarize it so that it's applicable to all ultrasound, advanced ultrasound imaging capabilities. But that's again the issue. There's nothing in the curriculum, to my knowledge. Certainly the registries are not testing on it yet.
right, right,
Um, and so as I get my book out there and as I preach the gospel of the new ultrasound,
right.
um, I some educators are coming on board. I think we've got probably 10 or 12 programs in the United States that are, again, I'm not bragging about my book, but they're using my book because they're saying, oh, this
Yeah.
explains it. So
Very much needed. Yes. Very much needed. Yeah. I think I talked about habits in one of my previous podcasts and how there are like safeguards, right? And so when we take a button away or when we add a different kind of button or whatever, that's messing with our security a little
absolutely,
bit in
absolutely.
our habits, right? Of uh, whatever we do. So understanding how habits work and different things, hopefully we can be a little bit more open-minded to trying new things. The younger generation is always so great at just jumping in and trying something, whereas I myself am like, well, wait a minute, let me help understand this more. Why are you taking this away? I kind of want a
Understandable.
little bit more of an explanation. And the younger folks are like, who cares why it works or how it works? This is what it does. But I do think too, just I've seen the mindset of people who don't like a certain brand of equipment, and that's who comes in, and so they already have a predispositioned mindset before they even experience it, right?
Totally.
Or some labs of and I kind of push back against this a little bit, but some labs will buy the same equipment that they've had because they liked the salesperson
Right,
and
right, right.
yep,
Yep.
that's just what we're going to get. And I thought, wait a minute here. We're talking, can we just base our decision on technology and not salespeople?
Great, I agree. And branding, I totally agree. And I mean, I've been in those situations before. We used to do something when I was working for this company that would really kind of catch people off guard because they do side by side demos, right? You
Right,
bring in
right,
this machine, you bring in that machine. And when company A, big famous ultrasound company, leader in the field, would see our little machine coming in, the salespeople would kind of freak out because what we would do, as you said, people have opinions. And they would look at the image, and that's the subjective approach to image evaluation, and it's valid, but it's subjective.
right.
With newer technology, we go in with one of those imaging pin phantoms,
Oh, yes. Yeah.
little pins. And we
Right.
can put our transducer, same megahertz, same convex,
Right.
same array, put it on there, and we would see those pins all the way down. Vendor A would put their same probe down, and it's like, oh my God, they're all over the place.
Right.
That's the objective method of image evaluation. So what I saw in the last few years out there is that trend that you're talking about changing a little bit. in that, well, and the other, well, I'm getting off topic a little bit. The other, in terms of decision making, is the cost of ownership. And so vendor A, you've been buying this company for the last 20 years and they'll upgrade you and all that stuff, but it costs. The newer companies now are coming out and saying, you know what? We will upgrade you for free. We will give you 5 years of free upgrades. We have better objective image quality. And with the purchasing decisions now being made, in certainly some cases, it's hospital by hospital, but there are these multiple organizations now. They're buying 100 different machines. 80 machines for the group are looking at the economics. And so that, those of us who prefer this brand, well, we don't really care what you think, Jim. We're buying this brand.
Right.
But it's been the protocol for many years. And I'm guilty of it. When back in the day, I preferred this brand over that brand.
Yeah, I am too. But I've had some brands come in and kind of blow me away recently that make me kind of question the big box, brand that I've been so loyal to for 28 years,
I totally agree. And that's I think that's evidence of what's happening with the new technology. Because I can probably guarantee you that those images that blew you away, as they did me, are based on this new imaging architecture.
Yeah.
And not as a conventional system.
Right. I agree. Yeah. Absolutely. So thank you so much for sharing this small part of your work. I think, again, it's important to bring this kind of information to our listeners. And I hope that you go out and get the new book so that you can educate yourself and help to educate others or stay up with the trends of ultrasound. And as we move forward in our profession. So thank you for your contribution and all the hours of work and different things. And hopefully this will become our new normal for ultrasound physics to understand the new technology. Obviously physics, like you said, the SPI that we're tested on, physics is physics, like you had mentioned, but understanding what we're using now is just as vitally important, I think, to understand. So thank you for bringing that to us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you for tuning in to It's All About the Frequency podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Share it with a friend and remember to keep your frequency high.